Good morning and welcome to the Health and Sport Committee this morning, and welcome to the 10th meeting of the Health and Sport Committee in 2021. We have received apologies from Alex Cole-Hamilton and David Torrance will be joining us a little later in the meeting. The first item on our agenda this morning is consideration of a consent notification in relation to some subordinate legislation. This consent notification proposes that the Scottish Government should give consent to the UK Government legislating using the powers in the EU Withdrawal Act 2018 in relation to a UK statutory instrument. The instrument before us today is the Food and Feed Hygiene and Safety Miscellaneous and Transitional Provisions EU Exit Regulations 2021. These regulations make the necessary amendment of the authorisation provisions for genetically modified food and feed additives and clarify that ministerial authorisation decisions are prescribed in the form of legislation. The regulations also address the need to amend general food law to ensure that ministers can capture third country goods coming to Great Britain via Northern Ireland when taking emergency measures. Can I ask if any members have any questions or comments on this instrument? I see Sandra White.
Thank you very much, Convener. Just points of clarification in regards to this. And I want to thank the clerks who have written this up because it's quite complicated in that respect. In Annex A, which is the letter, it's in page 3 and it's paragraph 3, the last sentence in that. It says, in regards to, obviously, a letter to yourself, Convener, it says, please note we are yet to have sight of the final draft SI and it is not available in the public domain at this stage. So I'm concerned about that. And also at the top of page 7, further down, very bottom, page 7, the top, where am I? Page 5, page 6, yeah, page 7. When it goes on to talk about the notification summary, it mentions at the very end of it, however, the proposals remain under consideration and are subject to change. The Food Standard FSS will provide an update in the event of any changes. I'm just a wee bit concerned if we pass this, basically to hand it over, with obviously these two concerns I've raised. And I just want a wee bit of clarification on that. And if I could summarise my understanding of it, and if I'm wrong, I can be corrected probably. My understanding is that this SI is to give emergency powers under the COVID-19 regulations, stop the import of GM food, feed and feed additives from entering the four nations, i.e. GB, directly from third countries or via the Northern Ireland. And this is due to Brexit, the Northern Ireland Protocol and internal market. I just wanted a wee bit of clarification on my summary of it and the two areas of concern that I've got.
Yeah, I hear your point. Give me just a moment. Are there any other comments? I wonder if I could ask David Cullen, the clerk, if he would like to comment on these concerns and clarify the position. David.
Thank you, Convener. In relation to sight of the SI, that has been, I think, the norm for a lot of these that we've done. We're doing them in advance based on the detail that was provided by the Scottish Government based on their discussions with the UK Government. In relation to Sandra's second point, I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that at all. I'm not sure what the position is.
No, okay, and I guess if there is concern on this matter, it's something we can revert to at our next meeting. I think time allows us to do that.
Yes, sorry, Convener, I think it's been laid on the 21st of March at the UK in that respect, or the UK Government, right, Westminster. So, I think yes. When I read it, but obviously I always raise these things, as you know.
Yes, indeed.
Said that's what happens normally with SIs, but I just think we need to keep an eye on these things. So therefore, if we were to agree to this and something came up in the SI, and obviously the last point that I raised with, and David doesn't know the answer to that one, can we rectify any of these things retrospectively, or if we agree to this going forward, there's nothing we can do?
I think what I think we can do is indicate our concerns and indicate that we expect full details to be provided in the notification regarding what provisions of the legislation are being amended and how that will actually all work. So I think the point is that we can approve this, but with qualifications that make it clear that we want the Scottish Parliament to be kept in the loop going forward in all of these matters.
Okay, that I'm content with that, Convener, as long as it's highlighted. Thank you.
Okay, I think we'll take that approach then. If other colleagues are content, colleagues will have seen the separate paper from Legal Services, which has in paragraphs 18 to 20 concludes how we may choose to approach this matter so as to ensure that the Parliament and its committees in future are fully engaged around these matters. Are colleagues content with the approach suggested there? That's good. Excellent. Thank you very much for that. And we will therefore write to the Scottish Government indicating that we're content with these regulations, but highlight the recommendations as discussed, and in particular with Sandra's points on board. Thank you very much. Agenda item number 2 is consideration of negative subordinate legislation, and we have 5 instruments before us under this item. 3 of these have been grouped, and we will consider these together. These are the National Assistance, Sums for Personal Requirements, Scotland Regulations 2021, which increase the value of personal expenses allowance in line with average earnings by an increase of 1.9%. The National Assistance Assessment of Resources Amendment Scotland Regulations 2021, which increases the value of savings credit disregard in line with average earnings, currently forecast to be 1.9%, and the National Assistance Assessment of Resources and Sums for Personal Requirements Amendment Scotland Regulations 2021, which amends the coming into force dates of the National Assistance Assessment of Resources Amendment Scotland Regulations 2021 and the National Assistance Sums for Personal Requirements Scotland Regulations 2021. I hope all members have followed all of that, and I have a query from David Stewart.
Thanks, Convener. It wasn't really a query, it was more to say I've looked into this, having an interest in pensions. I mean, they're all very positive issues, which I think are helpful from a rights point of view for NHS workers. So it's just to flag up that although they're very technical, they are quite important if you happen to be in these various categories. So it's just to say I would strongly endorse them.
Thank you very much. Any other comments from any colleagues? If not, is the committee agreed to make no recommendations on these 3 negative instruments? That is agreed. Thank you very much. The next instrument we will consider is the National Health Service Superannuation and Pension Schemes Miscellaneous Amendments Scotland Regulations 2021. This instrument makes changes to the employee contribution table for 2021-22, which updates the salaries and earnings bands on which the employee contribution percentages are set. Once again, are there any comments from any colleagues in relation to those regulations? If not, is the committee agreed to make no recommendation? That is agreed. Thank you very much. And the final instrument for consideration under this item is the Foods for Specific Groups Infant Formula and Follow-on Formula Scotland Amendment Regulations 2021. The purpose of this instrument is to apply the law in existence before the 21st of February on compositional and labelling standards for infant formula and follow-on formula manufactured from protein hydrolysates until the 22nd of February 2022, so an annual uprating. Again, can I invite any members who have any comments on this item to indicate now? If there are no comments from members, is the committee agreed to make no recommendations? That is agreed. Thank you very much. We now move to agenda item 3, which is consideration of further subordinate legislation. The committee will consider the following negative order of council statutory instruments: the Health and Care Professions Council Coronavirus Amendment No. 2 Rules Order of Council 2021 and the Health and Care Professions Council Registration and Fees Amendment Rules Order of Council 2021. These instruments are orders of the Privy Council which approve rules made by the Health and Care Professions Council. Members will note that one of these has been drawn to our attention, the first of these has been drawn to our attention by the Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee. The committee draws this instrument to the attention of Parliament on the basis that it was laid less than 28 days before coming into force and therefore breached the usual laying requirements under Section 28(2) of the Interpretation on Legislative Reform Scotland Act 2010. The committee was, however, content with the explanation that was provided by the Scottish Government for its failure to comply with the laying requirements. The committee also noted that this instrument rectifies the drafting error in SI 2021-27 before that instrument came into force on the 4th of March. The error was identified by the committee in its report on subordinate legislation considered on the 2nd of February. Can I ask if any members have any comments on this instrument? Members may have seen the letter that was sent to me as convener from the Health and Care Professions Council, explaining the basis on which they were intending to proceed. Is the committee then agreed to make no recommendation? That is agreed. Thank you very much. And we now move on to agenda item 4, which is consideration of the procedure and categorisation of 2 negative EU exit SSIs. The instruments are the Food, Natural Mineral Water, Spring Water and Bottled Drinking Water EU Exit Scotland Amendment Regulations 2021 and the Food, Natural Mineral Water, Spring Water and Bottled Drinking Water EU Exit Scotland Amendment Regulations 2021. Scottish Government has assigned the first of these as medium in terms of its significance under the SSI protocol and has assigned the second of these as low in its significance. Again, this has been considered by the Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee at its meeting on the 23rd of February. They agreed that the negative procedure was appropriate and that the first instrument, number SSI 2021 number 66, should be categorised as medium in terms of its significance under the SSI protocol. And then at its meeting on the 9th of March, the committee considered the second instrument and agreed the negative procedure was appropriate and that the instrument should be categorised as low in terms of under the SSI protocol. So our decision today is, first of all, to decide whether the categorisation provided by the Scottish Government is correct. If agreed, we will then consider the instrument in our next agenda item under the negative procedure. Can I, first of all, I know Emma Harper wants to come in on this instrument. Can I ask if it's a matter in relation to the categorisation of the instrument, or is it in relation to the substance of the instrument? Emma Harper.
Thanks, Convener. Good morning. It's not in relation to categorisation, it's the substance of what's contained within the instrument.
Fine. Okay, great. Has anyone any comments on the categorisation? As I say, that has already been considered by the DPLR committee, who were content. Are we therefore agreed with the categorisation of this instrument? That is agreed. Thank you very much. We now move on to agenda item 5, which is consideration of these 2 negative instruments that we have just been discussing. While they agreed to the categorisation, the DPLR committee brought the second of the instruments, 2021-109, to the attention of our committee as a result of it having been laid less than 28 days before coming into force, breaching the laying requirements under Section 28(2) of the Interpretation and Legislative Reform Scotland Act 2010. However, the DPLR committee was content with the explanation provided by the Scottish Government for failing to comply with usual laying requirements. So can I ask any other members who have comments on this to place an R in the chat box, and can I invite Emma Harper to comment on these instruments? Emma Harper.
Thanks, Convener. Because of the late paper that came into our inbox this morning, I was just reading around the issues of what constitutes natural mineral water and the reciprocal, I guess, agreements between EU and the UK about then what is spring water, what is mineral water. And it looks like Scottish businesses were not supporting continued recognition of waters from the EU and the EEA countries after the UK left the EU. And while perhaps not surprisingly, retailers and distributors of EU and EEA mineral water wanted recognition to continue as long as possible, but that has not been the case as we've exited the EU. And I'm sure businesses in Scotland that export their mineral water to the EU might not be very happy if they can't do that anymore. And I'm sure that has an impact on Scottish water businesses and reciprocal arrangements as well. So I just want to confirm that this means that spring water and mineral water from Scotland won't be recognised in the EU and vice versa. So that would basically have a negative effect on businesses as a result of exiting the EU and the inability to come to an agreement because they were hoping that there would be sufficient scope to enable the status quo to continue as far as possible.
Yes, and I think what you're saying and what you're referring to in relation to this morning's advice is that despite that these regulations do not of themselves overcome that obstacle. Is that your understanding of the position?
Yes, yes. I understand that we need to make sure that any bottled water is safe and that we know the contents of it. But it looks like we will no longer be able to get certain, well, natural mineral water or spring water or other bottled drinking water into the EU.
Yes, that's clearly disappointing. In relation to these instruments, I guess that there are two options open to us and indeed to any member of the committee. It is open to the committee to make no recommendation. Equally, there is the option of lodging a motion to annul the regulations. I'm not sure if that's what you're proposing or simply if what you're seeking is some clarification from government. Emma Harper.
Yes, thanks, Convener. Basically, just recognition that, this will be something that will stop bottled water going back and forward from the EU into Scotland and vice versa. So there would be I'm interested in the business impact, and also that this is something that's going to continue unless further agreement is obtained between further negotiations and then other recommendations made.
Yes, and presumably that is a matter which will be subject to continuing discussions between the relevant authorities, both in the European and in the United Kingdom, including the Scottish Government. And that would therefore, if there was, as you suggest, further discussion leading to a different agreement, then those would no doubt return in the form of subordinate legislation to a committee of the next Parliament.
Okay.
So I think that's probably yeah. I think the point about our consideration today is that it's open to us to yourself to lodge a motion to annul, but equally that would not of itself affect the position in relation to the relations between the EU and the Scottish Government and discussions around these issues. Would it therefore be a matter while we made no recommendations in relation to the instruments, would it be helpful to write separately to the Scottish Government and express concern about the implication of this and what this might mean in relation to Scottish water producers going forward?
Yes, I would be interested in that, because one of the producers I know exports to about 30 countries. 8 of them are European, 3 in Asia, and 4 in the Middle East. So there's so this is something that would obviously impact businesses. I guess I'm concerned that we might end up with having more water than we know what to do with, because we have got very successful businesses in Scotland that are exporting no longer.
Indeed, indeed. I guess there are many precedents for Scotland having more water than we know what to do with, but this would be a new version of the same tale. But if members are content, then I would suggest that we make no recommendations in relation to the regulations, but that we write separately to the Scottish Government and ask for their view on the concerns Emma Harper has raised. Is that agreeable to members? Thank you very much. We will proceed on that basis, and we will move shortly. We will now move into private session. We will resume on a different platform at 10:25, but for the moment I now suspend this meeting.